Hey learners, welcome back to e-learning platform of GS College of Commerce, Verda. I'm Assistant Professor Rajeshwari Sharma and I welcome you all once again to this e-learning platform. So, this lecture is for the BCom 6th semester for the subject Advanced Statistics. So, we have started with the first unit of the subject, that is correlation analysis. In previous lecture, I have explained you the meaning of correlation analysis. We have seen the different definitions of correlation analysis and we have seen the different types of correlation. So, today we will have a brief recap of all these things, then we will move to the further concept of degree of correlation. So let's begin. So what is basically the correlation? Correlation is a tool or the tool of study which explains the relationship between two or more interrelated series of variables. Like if we are talking about the relationship between the price and demand, so here price is one variable and the demand is another variable. So here we can study the relationship between those two variables and that would be known as correlation. Okay, so whenever we are talking about the study of relationship between two variables, so it comes under the purview of correlation analysis. Now we have seen the different definitions given by different statisticians for the correlation analysis. Out of that, one definition had been given by Croxton and Crowden. So according to Croxton and Crowden, they say that it's a quantitative tool whereby the relationship between the two variables are discovered and measured. Okay, and this relationship is measured with the help of a formula. Okay, so according to Croxton and Crowden, whenever we are talking about the correlation analysis, so it's a statistical tool which is quantitative in nature and which shows us the relationship between the two series of variables with the help of a formula. Then we have seen the different types of correlation, whereby we have seen positive correlation, then negative correlation, then simple correlation, then multiple correlation, then partial and total correlation, after that linear and non-linear correlation. So in today's lecture, we are going to see the concept of coefficient of correlation and the degree of correlation. So what is basically the coefficient of correlation? What is the meaning of coefficient of correlation? So, coefficient of correlation can be understood further with the concept of coefficient of correlation. So, correlation may be defined as a tendency towards interrelation variation, and coefficient of correlation is measure of such a tendency. That is, the degree to which the two variables are interrelated is measured by a coefficient which is called coefficient of correlation. So, in simple terms, when we talk about the coefficient of correlation, so it is calculated with the help of a formula to calculate coefficient of correlation, and it is a tool which is used to express the degree to which the two variables are interrelated. It is basically used to measure the degree to which the two variables are interrelated with each other. If the two variables are quite closely related, so we call it is highly correlated. If you are going to see very less amount of correlation or very low amount of correlation between the two variables, then we can say that there is very low degree of correlation. And if there is, you will find optimum, or we can say the less than, more than lower degree and less than higher degree of correlation, so you can call it the moderate correlation. Okay, so these are the different degrees of correlation that we are going to see further in detail. So the degree or intensity of relationship between two variables can be ascertained by computing the value of coefficient of correlation. So here coefficient of correlation is a tool which is used to measure the degree or intensity of relationship between two series of variable. Like if we say that there is negative correlation between the price and demand, so the coefficient of correlation would help us to know up to what extent there is negative correlation, whether it is highly negative, highly negatively correlated, or there is moderate negative correlation, or there is low negative correlation. So this way, whenever we are talking about the degree or extent of relationship between the two variables, so this coefficient of correlation helps us to measure the degree of correlation between the two variables. So whenever we are talking about the degree of correlation, so it is further divided into 5 parts. That is perfect correlation, then high degree of correlation, then moderate degree of correlation, then low degree of correlation, and then absence of correlation. So let's see the meaning of perfect correlation. See, what is the meaning of perfect correlation? So if the variations in two variables are in constant ratio, the correlation is said to be perfect. Okay. So what's there? If there is going to be the constant ratio, okay, if there is going to be the constant ratio in the variation of two variables, then we will call it perfectly correlated. Like we can take the example of price and demand again. If you will observe that price is increasing by 50%, and due to that 50% increase in price, if demand is also declining by exactly 50%, then we can say that there is perfect negative correlation between the price and demand. Okay, so whenever there is perfect negative correlation between the price and demand, so the coefficient of correlation would be -1. Okay, and on the other hand, if we are going to talk about the perfect positive correlation, so again there is going to be the constant ratio, but here we can say take the example of the price and supply. If you are going to see the price is increasing by 50%, and in response to that, if the supply is also increasing by exactly 50%, so in that case we can see the ratio is constant. So here we will say there is perfect positive correlation between the supply and price, and in this case the coefficient of correlation would be +1. So in case of perfect correlation, if the coefficient of correlation is perfectly negative, so the coefficient of correlation would be -1, and if the perfect coefficient of correlation is there is perfectly negative correlation between the two variables, then the coefficient of correlation would be -1. Okay, then second one is high degree of correlation. So what is mean by high degree of correlation? When correlation coefficient between two variable is not perfect but in adequate quantity, correlation is of high degree. So see, when we find that there is no perfect correlation, but still the correlation is of high degree, so in that case we say that there is high degree of correlation. And when we talk about the coefficient of correlation, so in case of high degree of coefficient of correlation, the value of coefficient of correlation would be between 0.75 to 1. Okay, usually you see that if there is going to be the high degree of correlation, so you will find it like 0.90, 0.85, 0.80 and all this. Okay, so in case of high degree of correlation, there is going to be the coefficient of correlation would lie between the 0.75 to 1. Okay, and in case it's a negative high degree of correlation is there, but there is negative high degree of correlation between two variables, so the coefficient of correlation would be between -0.75 to -1. So this is how we can understand the high degree of correlation. The next one is moderate degree of correlation. So again, how can we understand that there is moderate degree of correlation? So here, if the value of coefficient of correlation lies between 0.25 to 0.75, so we can say that there exists the moderate degree of correlation between the two variables. And if there is negative moderate degree of correlation between the two variables, so you will find that the coefficient of correlation would lie between -0.25 to -0.75. Okay, so if the degree of coefficient of correlation between two variable is neither way high is neither very high nor very low, so it would be called as moderate degree of correlation. And we have discussed what's going to be the value of coefficient of correlation in case of moderate degree of correlation. The next one that we are going to discuss here is low degree of correlation. So what is this low degree of correlation? See, when the correlation between two variables is of very small degree, so it is said that correlation is of low degree. Okay, so whenever we are talking about the low degree of correlation, so here you can observe that the coefficient of correlation would lie between 0 to 0.25, and in case there is negative low degree of correlation, so again the coefficient of correlation would lie between -0 to -0.25. Okay, so this would be the case of low degree of correlation. The another thing that we are going to see here is absence of correlation. So how do we get to know if there is absence of correlation? If you calculate the correlation between the two series by applying the formula and you get that the coefficient of correlation is 0, then you can say that there is absence of correlation between the two series. Okay, so what in what cases there's going to be the absence of correlation? What could be the cases where the where there will be absence of correlation? So if variation in two groups of variable are not corresponding to each other, so it is a case of absence of correlation. Okay, so in case of absence of correlation, you would find that the coefficient of correlation would be 0. When the two variables are no way related to each other, so it's going to be the case of absence of correlation. Now if you're talking about the height of a person and the marks of a person, so these are the two series whereby you can find no relationship, between which you can not establish any kind of relationship. So there are such cases whereby you will find that the coefficient of correlation is coming to the 0, and this case would be called as the case of absence of correlation. So this way the degree of correlation can be determined. So in nutshell, if there is if the value of coefficient of correlation is +1, so we will say there is perfect positive correlation. If the coefficient of correlation would be -1, so we will say there is negative perfect correlation. And in case of high correlation, if there is positive, the variables are positive, there is a highly positive relationship between the two variables, so the coefficient would lie between +0.75 to +1. And if there is a high negative correlation between the two variables, so the coefficient would lie between -0.75 to -1. The next degree comes to the moderate degree of correlation. So again there is positive moderate degree of correlation, so you would find that coefficient of correlation would lie between +0.25 to +0.75. and if there is negative moderate degree of correlation, so you would find that coefficient of correlation would lie between -0.25 to -0.75. The next degree comes to the low degree of correlation. In the case of low degree of correlation, you will find that if it's a positive low degree, so the coefficient would lie between +0 to +0.25. and if there is going to be the negative low degree of correlation, so you will find that the coefficient would lie between -0 to -0.25. Okay, the another case would be the absence of correlation. In absence of correlation, you would find that coefficient of correlation would come to the 0. So this way the degree of correlation can be understood, and this degree of correlation helps us to understand the relationship between the two variables. It helps us to understand up to what extent those variables are related to each other, whether they are highly correlated, whether they are moderately correlated, or there is low level of correlation, or there is absence of correlation. So this way degree of correlation helps us to derive the conclusion regarding the extent of relationship between the two variables. So here we are done with the concept of the degree of correlation. In next lecture we are going to deal with the method of calculation of correlation, and we would start with the Carl Pearson's coefficient of correlation. So guys, just keep studying and stay tuned to our YouTube channel. Keep watching the lectures. In case you are having any kind of doubt in any of the topics, so you can contact me via WhatsApp, or you can call me as well. So thanks. Thank you so much.